like you to think about the future. I'd like you to think about surprise. What has been the biggest surprise to you in 2014? Did it look anything like this? I asked a group of friends to send me pictures of surprise, and this is what they sent me. I hope it doesn't reflect on my friends, but pretty miserable. I think we live in a world that is just in constant uncertainty. I call this my mural of surprise. War, terrorism, drought, hunger, you name it, just misery. Now, can't surprise be positive? And of course it can. Top right-hand corner, Steve Jobs holding up his iPhone, 2007 product launch. That's great, but largely, surprise is about negative uncertainty, especially large-scale surprise. And I believe that large-scale surprise, large-scale uncertainty is the enemy of insight, and it's the enemy of progress. And hence, I also think that this inhibits leaders of today, and that's what I want to talk about tonight. So, think about it this way. First, can we really do anything about this? Is it just sort of natural world? Is surprise just something that is always going to be there? You know what? I think humanity, as long as we've been around, have been trying to fight negative uncertainty, all the way back from sort of avoiding lions chasing us into a cave to today's financial and weather and political forecasting, all of these sort of things. But we can do so much more. So we'll start in this area. Social media data, analyzed, can predict large-scale events, even at a societal level. This was a protest last weekend in Turkey, in Istanbul. Was that predictable? Or was it sort of showing up out of thin air? This is a call for a protest that showed up a couple of weeks ago in Sialkot, in Punjab province in Pakistan. Will this happen? Or will this sort of simmer away and nothing happens? Turns out, when we look at a protest like this, or a call for a protest like this, if we have enough volume of them, if we have sort of momentum behind them, if there is enough violence in the language and enough of violence backdrop in the country, this will lead to violence in the streets. Now, it's really hard, really, really hard, I have every experience of this, to predict anything. And it's even just getting your hands on the data is difficult. But as much as Twitter and Facebook and so on may seem like mindless banter, sorry for those of you sort of tweeting out there, really, if you can extract the signal out of the noise, we can come up with really powerful predictive signals. So I'm going to ask you to sort of suspend disbelief for a second and think about the following. So social media data, again, if we can extract it in a good way, we index it, we organize it, and we analyze it, can predict social unrest at an 85% accuracy level. 85% accuracy level. Very powerful number. This is a model that we built based on a random forest classifier, sort of a mathematical modeling technique. We looked at, I think, 28 different countries prone to violence and unrest. We took data from 2011, 2012, and then trained that on that data and tested it on 2013 and been running it out of sample in 2014. And what you see here is sort of across the x-axis time, a rolling 3-week time window. Across the y-axis, you have the countries. And then sort of naturally from blue to red, from, I don't know, calm to badness being red, unrest. And what we now can do, as you can see from the coloring, is that we can look at, oh, that happened a little bit too fast. We can look at Pakistan and see that that was sort of standing out there with a reddish color that was indicating that Pakistan might actually go bad on Saturday. And that's actually, in this case, it was interesting because Pakistan was starting to do this a couple of days ago, but before it had been calm for a good while. Now, it was not red alert, but it was telling us, let's go dive deeper. And this model has performed very nicely over the spring here. This was a couple of months ago. Egypt started going red. led to an internal email discussion in our company. You know, what's going on here? Will this lead to violence in the streets? And bittersweet success. 43 hours later, bang, people dead in the streets of Cairo. So, putting the sort of the bittersweet aspect of it aside, it's very interesting. We can take very local data and aggregate it into large-scale predictions, all sort of at the societal level. Now, I can't ask you to sort of continue to suspend disbelief here. That's not reasonable. What we've been sort of doing is, you know, you think about sort of big data analysis, and unfortunately we hear way too much of that. I promise I won't use that word again. But so forgetting that, let's talk a little bit about how we actually do this. So the basic trick here is to organize the web for analysis rather than search. Organize the web for analysis rather than search. So what you're seeing here is a search for MIT. I thought that was sort of appropriate. In Google, you know, we think of sort of the Google founders set out to organize the world's information, and they've done it beautifully. Type in MIT, bang, here I get my search results. Very nice. But it doesn't really tell me anything about MIT before I start reading documents and so on. It just gives me the raw links. And there is so much opportunity if I could sort of dive in beyond the links and look into the data. So the way that we'll do that is by looking at cyber attacks. So I sort of have a personal interest in this area, but I think they're also a good sort of area of study for this, because if you think about it, so you've all read about Target and eBay and all these sort of recent hacks that may actually even impacted some of you in the audience. They're interesting because they happen on the web, so we can actually study them on the web, and you might sort of say then, oh, that's interesting. Shouldn't that tell us that we could actually analyze such data and even use that to develop predictive models about or even be able to predict cyber attacks? And the simple answer is yes, we can do that. But to do that, we got to sort of decompose text, decompose the web into data. So what sort of data we're going to go look for? So the most obvious is something like this. Anonymous calling out, a little bit like our unrest sort of tweet here. Anonymous saying, let's go attack Goldman Sachs, February 14th, in the future, attacking their Twitter and Facebook accounts. So that's interesting. And you know, now you might be saying like, yeah, but does serious cyber actors really do this? Turns out that some really do. And not just these guys, and they do it for particular reasons. That's like a whole talk in itself, so we put that aside. So let's assume that we can't find these sort of signals. What do we then do? So now we need to dive in and look at the data behind this. We need to understand what's the activity of Anonymous. So Anonymous is interesting in being quiet for a long time, but this week here, sort of coming into the World Cup, they've sort of come out of their dormant status. Goldman Sachs, is investment banks, are they being targeted? Attacking Twitter was very popular, if you want, in 2013, but it's sort of gone away. Now, that's easier said than done. We're looking at text. How do we do that? So what we need to do then is to take the text and decompose that using natural language processing techniques so that we can understand that Anonymous is an organization, understand that Twitter and Facebook is a social media outlet. Destroying Twitter may mean sort of attacking them. Goldman Sachs is an investment bank in New York. And maybe most interestingly, understand that February 14th is actually a date in the future, so it might be pointing to something that would potentially happen. And then once we've done that decomposition, we need to store this in a large database, sort of have that flow in real time. And now we end up with a magnificent data set of historical events, current events, and events that might happen in the future that we can use to provide sort of insights and alerts to either imminent threats, midterm worries, or even long-term trends. All right, so this is pretty cool. We've been able to sort of look at social unrest and looking at cyber attacks. But, you know, does this really matter? Can we really do something impactful with this? Or is this just sort of playing around with data? And there's plenty of that going around, I can promise you that. So can we really impact things? And I believe we can. And the way to sort of dive into that, I think, is to say leaders armed with strong data can do better decisions and better navigate risks. Very obvious sort of statement, but I think it's not so obvious because leaders have a serious shortage of data, and especially when it comes to the world outside their own organizations, outside their own little bubbles, if you want. So let's think about that. And I'll use an example for sort of a thought experiment to think about investments. Investments are good because they are sort of about the outside world, and data is the key to sort of do good investments in my book. So, and especially we'll sort of think about technology investments because they really are about the outside world largely. If we're going to be successful in this, we've got to be able to understand what's going on around us. So what do we need to do? We got to be able to sort of figure out, and I'm using space travel here just to come up with something magnificent, but so technology investments, what do we need to be able to figure out? Or we got to be able to hire scientists, we're going to build gadgets, we're going to start R&D programs, we may allocate venture capital, all of these sort of things. And these sort of activities are totally prone to failure over and over. So what sort of insights could we be looking for that could help us? What sort of data, if we could just do a little bit better? So I'm thinking of, I'd like to be able to see technology trends better than my competition. I'd like to see convergence in technologies when things are coming together that has never lived together before, opening up new opportunities for me. I'd like to even be able to have insight to the product roadmap of my competitor. All of these sort of things. I think of Jeff Bezos, who said last week, I think literally he said, I'd love to know the Apple product roadmap. That makes sense, doesn't it? So here's sort of an example of this. Here we took and take in real time early Chinese science data from early Chinese science outlets, conferences, papers, even actually sort of pre-papers is where we really want to look, blogs, these sort of likes, in Chinese language, and extract that, organize it, aggregate it, and then decompose it by places and regions in China so we can get a real-time map into where and how China is developing technology. So now you might be like, all right, so I'm going to put that to work, or put that to use. So imagine you're running a major defense department, sort of a minor job. You have a big R&D budget you're going to put to work, and you're going to use that to mitigate your adversary. Your adversary also have a big R&D budget, by the way. And you want to avoid becoming the guy who sort of stand there and suddenly see the shiny new stealth fighter of your adversary and make you feel pretty stupid, which, by the way, happened recently. If you had this sort of data and could actually see and get insight into what your adversary are doing, what could you do? You could allocate your own money smarter, you could create intelligence programs, you could tweak operational planning. Lots of things. And you do not need to be the head of a major defense department to do that. This could be Apple versus Samsung versus Amazon, or really anybody who needs to have better insight into the external world. All right, so all this talk here about analysis and prediction may leave some people in the room sort of uncomfortable. I don't know. Maybe there's an elephant in the room here that if we do really well at this, will this leave us with a world that is just too boring? I don't know. Is this going to end up with being just too serene? And you know what? I don't think so. Maybe something else will make that happen. But A, this is very difficult. Hopefully that's come across. It's very tricky. B, this is about large-scale surprise, large-scale uncertainty. And I think the personal worlds we live in, that is really about a different world. And whether it's positive or negative surprises, perfectly safe, no worries. All right, so with all of that said, let's go back and look at the problem. We wanted to see, could we attack large-scale uncertainty, drawing on web data, and create a more insightful world? And you know what? I really believe we can. We can predict large-scale unrest, even at a societal level, drawing on web data. We can predict cyber attacks and give meaningful heads up to things coming out of the darkest corners of the internet, and we can impact large-scale decision-making. I really think that we can make a dent in the world of negative uncertainty. We're not being chased into caves by lions anymore. So maybe we can even take the world of the mural of the surprise and make that look more like this. Maybe it's not going to be all this shiny, but maybe we can do a little bit better. Thank you very much.